Okay, recording has started. Welcome to the October 16th, 2025 Division of Adult Education monthly webinar. This session is being recorded. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of this session. No other recording of this session is allowed. I will say that if you happen to have your camera on, it does record the visual as well. So if you don't want to be on camera in a recording that is posted publicly, please turn off your cameras. Okay, so before I get into the content of the webinar, I do want to acknowledge how difficult this year is. The month-long uncertainty over federal funding, followed by the ongoing state budget impasse, is really making it challenging for you to run your programs. Many of you are working with reduced staff, either because you've had to lay off or furlough staff, or because staff have left and you're unable to replace them. And even if you've been able to retain staff, you're having to postpone purchasing instructional materials, renewing licenses for computer-based resources, limiting other expenditures. That said, we are still accountable as a state for providing services and achieving outcomes. So as I go through the webinar, please kind of keep that context in mind. We understand the immediacy of the challenges, but at the same time, at the state level and within the system, we need to provide support, provide guidance, provide information, and help our system, all of our programs, be able to continue to provide services and get outcomes in the future. So we're hoping that the challenges right now are relatively temporary, and kind of what we're covering now is longer term, rest of this year and into the future. So I'll start with some updates and just reminders, some general things. Then I'm going to cover some of the results from our 2024-25 National Reporting System reporting that was due October 1st, the implications of that for this year and moving forward, a brief introduction to the data awareness campaign that we'll be implementing, and then Chrissy Klinger will be talking a little bit about the PA Foundation Skills Framework. So just some general ideas, some general thoughts. We have gotten questions from programs. So last year, towards the end of the year, we asked you to make sure you were using up your federal funds, and that if you had any funds to return, this would be from your 064 grants, to return state funds. We're going to continue with that this year. We do have substantial federal funds that we're kind of sitting on, and things are a little unsure at the federal level, so we would like to use up as much of our federal funds as possible, so that there's not a chance for them to pull them back or anything like that. So I realize you're not getting any money right now, but as you're deciding where to charge expenditures and such, whatever you can charge to your federal funds, please do. Of course, anything related to professional development on the 064 grants does have to be charged to the state. But if at all possible, use up your federal funds, and if you need to return funds, have it be state. Please keep your advisors up to date on the impact of the budget impasse on your agency and on your program. As I'm getting information from them, I am sharing it with my bureau director and deputy secretary to share it with senior management. So we are keeping them up to date about the impact of the ongoing budget impasse. And this was just something I found out yesterday. Commonwealth employees got a notice that future webinars may require an additional step to join, that they are implementing CAPTCHA verification for Teams meetings. That's all I've gotten. I don't have any more details, but It sounds like that might be in place for the next webinar, so just wanted to give everyone's a heads up that that is likely coming, and we'll provide more information when it comes, if we get more. Regarding the division quarterly expenditure report worksheets, we discovered too late to fix it for the first budget revision before I sent them out earlier this year. On the budget revision tab, there is a cell that calculates the changes from budgeted to expenditures that helps you decide if you need to submit a request for a budget revision. And we discovered that that cell right now does not have any decimals to it. It's a straight integer, and the system is, or the worksheet is rounding down, so that there have been agencies whose changes in expenditures last year were, say, 10.4%. So they should have submitted a budget revision, but did not, because the report was showing just 10% because it was rounding down. So the advisors will be changing that on the forms that you have submitted. So while they're reviewing those, they will make a change to that form, send you the form back, and we will ask that you use the corrected form moving forward for the rest of the year. This is just an FYI. I do not have details about this. The details are on that website at the link on the slide. But the bill that was passed back in July, the OBBB made changes to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is called SNAP, or informally called food stamps. And as a result of that bill, some SNAP recipients will now have to meet work requirements and report that they are meeting those requirements to the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services. SNAP recipients who are not meeting those requirements will be limited to 3 months of SNAP benefits for a 3-year period. The initial change was implemented on September 1st, and additional changes will be effective November 1st. These changes mean that certain individuals will have to meet SNAP work requirements that include working, volunteering, or participating in an education or training program for at least 20 hours a week or 80 hours each month, and report that they are meeting those requirements. So effective November 1st, 2025, the expanded work requirements will apply to individuals who are 18 to 64 years old, do not have a dependent child under 14, and are considered physically and mentally able to work. In addition, being a veteran or a current or former foster youth age 18 to 24 will no longer be exemptions for these requirements. If you have any questions about the changes, please refer to this website, or your student support specialist may want to reach out to the local county assistance office for more information. I have reached out to DHS. At this point, it appears that adult education will not count as education for the purpose of exemptions. That's not set in stone, but based on what they understand from the requirements, our services are not considered education for these purposes. But, we'll wait to hear more information from DHS. Okay, so eData opened for 25-26 back on September 9th. All but 5 agencies, and that's grantees and subgrantees, are in eData. And of the ones in eData, all but 2 have been in eData for more than 14 days, which means that everybody should have data in the system, and the 2 agencies that have been in there for fewer than 14 days both actually have data in there. So overall, despite the challenges you are facing, you have been doing a great job of entering data. Thank you. However, there is one grantee and 4 subgrantees who have no adults entered in eData yet this year. In addition, there are 4 grantees and 1 subgrantee who have adults entered, but none or very few of those adults have any attendance hours. So, if you're an agency and you're aware that you're a little delayed in getting data in, as a reminder, you are expected to enter it within 14 days. As I said, by far the majority of you are doing that, and thank you very much for your diligence in getting that done and getting the data entered. So why do I harp so much on data? Like, Amanda, you're always talking about data. Well, we have reporting requirements that are associated with our funding. The data that you collect and enter is directly related to what we have to report as part of our federal reporting. So as I said earlier, we had statistical reports for 2024-25 that were due, October 1st. And those tend to be, they're statistical reports, and they provide information on the demographics and other status about our students and the outcomes. Now, our reports are all aggregate reports. We do not submit individual participant level data. We submit aggregate reports. Then we also have a narrative report that is due, December 31st. That, we use the data, we use other information, we use reports that various types of programs have submitted, plus those surveys, the Corrections Ed survey, which was sent out only to those agencies that provided corrections education last year. I know a couple of you have reached out to your advisor saying, hey, we didn't see the corrections education survey. Those of you who are not in eData as having provided corrections education did not get the survey this year, so no panic about that. Those of you who provided corrections education, if you have not completed that survey, and there are 2 grantees and 2 subgrantees who have not done so, please get that in. We do use that for our narrative report, as well as the PA Career Link and Adult Education survey/report. There are still 10 grantees and 11 subgrantees that have not done that report. So please double check that you have completed it and get that in as soon as possible, because we do use all of that information for our reporting. So, key report that we report or that we submit is called Table SPR. SPR stands for the State Performance Report. And that's kind of considered the, and I have it in quotes, official report. That is the one that is mentioned in statute as how we have to report on our participant demographics and outcomes. It is the same format for all of the core programs. Each of the core programs submits our own report, but it is the same data, not the same data, but it's the same format. We're reporting on the same data elements, the same outcomes, etc. It includes performance measures by the demographics of the participants, as well as the barriers to employment. So for 24-25, these are the required performance indicators, according to WIOA, that all of the core programs have to report on. If you do the annual NRS training that we require you to do, these should be familiar to you. We have to report on 4 exit-based criteria. So these, indicators. These are indicators for students who have exited the program. So there is an indicator of employment in the second quarter after exit, employment in the fourth quarter after exit, median earnings of those individuals
Can I come
who
around
are,
there?
hi, please turn off your mics. Median earnings of those who are employed in the second quarter after exit, credential attainment, and then measurable skill gain, which you should all be familiar with because I talk about it a lot. Measurable skill gain is for all students, and that is while they are participating. But those first four are all exit-based indicators. In 24-25, our employment in the second quarter after exit performance was 40.69%. And our target was 47.5%. So we are below the target. As a reminder, everyone who exits is included in the denominator of the employment of the employment indicators. They are included whether they are in the labor force or not, and they are included whether we have a valid Social Security number for them or not. Quick look at eData or the Access template showed that 1/3 of the students in our programs last year had all nines as their Social Security numbers. So, oops, sorry, did not mean to move that slide. So what that means is, we are not going to show employment for at least 1/3 of our students. And I mentioned this at the kickoff, there is the tension of not wanting to share SSNs, especially now. But at the same time, we do a data match with unemployment compensation data with LNI to get our employment results. And if we don't have Social Security numbers for the individuals, they're not going to show up as employed, even if they are. So our second quarter was, basically 7 points below the target. Fourth quarter, we were at 43, also about 7 points below target. On the other hand, those people who were employed, their median wage was significantly higher than the target, which is good news for those who are employed. Now, our credential attainment, the denominator for that is kind of two sets of individuals. One, anyone who at any point in the program year was at ABE level 5 or 6 and did not have a high school diploma is in that denominator. They're expected to be working towards their high school equivalency. Whether they've taken the tests or not, they're included in the denominator if they've exited the program. As you can see, we did not meet our target for that one. That said, we did exceed our target of 37% for measurable skill gains. Last year, we just barely met it. This year, you guys really did a great job. More than met it, exceeded it. So thank you very much. I think there was a lot of focus on that in some agencies. You were really working towards making that work. So thank you very much. The kind of bad news is that as we negotiate targets for the future years, that will now be our baseline, and we will have to do better than 41% moving forward. And I'm going to ask the advisors if there's, if you see any comments or if anyone's raising their hands for questions, please stop me and let me know. Okay, I did want to show you the website. So this is our National Reporting System website. This is how we submit our data. And this is the statewide performance report. So I wanted you to be able to see how we are using the data that you submit to us. Why are we collecting this? Why are we making you report on it? Things like that. So as you can see, all of the core programs report data using the same form. Theirs is in a different system, but this is ours. So here in the summary information, you can see here it says funds expended for career services. So, we ask you in your final expenditure reports for the 064 grant and the 061 grant, we ask you to report how much have you spent on those 5 career services. And it's kind of challenging to calculate because none of it ties directly to function codes, right? So when those of you who have been monitored know we ask, how do you calculate this? And you're like, why? Why are you asking us for these things? Well, it's because we are required to report a dollar amount in our state performance report. So this is where we use that data. For those of you that provide IETs and use our grant funds for occupational training, that is where we use this. We also use that for our financial reports. As you can see, this is our co-enrollment percentage. We are actually able to do a data match with labor and industry to see which of our participants are also participants in one of the other core programs at the same time, which could be an overlap of one day, but they're enrolled in more than one core program at the same time. Only 3.3% of our students were co-enrolled last year. And what I will say is that is one of the big issues that Title II state directors are hearing from the powers that be at the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, that they would like to see more co-enrollment. We do stress, we meaning the Title II state directors do point out that we're not necessarily the only ones involved in co-enrollment. You can only co-enroll students if the other core programs are willing to also enroll them. And in almost all states, there are real challenges to that happening. So we're not alone in that, but we are hearing it from the federal level that they would like to see an increase in co-enrollment. So for those of you who are able to co-enroll, thank you for having that relationship with your local Title I, usually providers. But we do understand that, if they're not willing to co-enroll, it's hard for you to do anything about that. So we do ask for lots of demographic information. Oh, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. So here's our total statewide performance, these 2 rows. So you can see the top row is the targets that I discussed on that slide. And then the row below that is our actual performance. So as you can see, our target for employment in the second quarter, 47.5, actual 40.69. There's those. And then here, the good one, our target was 37% for measurable skill gain, and we actually achieved 41.24%. We are required to report on all of those outcomes by subgroups. So we have to report on the breakout by ages. And because this form is standard across all of the programs, there actually is a row for individuals under 16 because both OVR and Title I youth, I believe, can serve people younger than 16, but of course we cannot, which is why that row is blank. So as you can see, it shows the outcomes by demographics, and there are some pretty, significant differences in measurable skill gain across the subgroups. Then, I know one of the frustrations we hear from folks is, why do we have to collect those barriers to employment? And this is why you have to collect those barriers to employment, because we have to report on them. The other thing to keep in mind is that individuals with barriers to employment are considered, quote unquote, harder to serve, right? And so they have more barriers to achieving these outcomes than individuals who do not have these barriers. So when it comes to how the federal offices look at our performance, and this gets complicated, while our kind of starting official data, for example, our outcome for the employment rate in the second quarter after exit is 40.69%. There is something called a statistical adjustment model that takes into consideration the demographics and the employment barriers that our participants have, along with the economic conditions in the state. There's a whole bunch of different data used in the statistical adjustment model that the federal offices then apply, and they might say, okay, maybe you were only at 40.69%, but when we look at the students that you served and the barriers that they have, and we look at the economic conditions in your state, maybe that actually adjusts the target down to 42%. On the other hand, it could adjust it up to 55%. We have no idea until they apply it and let us know what happened. But one thing to understand is they use the barriers to employment within the statistical adjustment model. And if we're serving individuals who have those barriers to employment, supposedly that statistical adjustment model should address those additional challenges and take that into consideration when seeing how we as a state are doing against our targets. But like I said, I know that there's a statistical adjustment model. It is very complicated. I am by no means an expert on it. I cannot explain it to you by any means. I just know that they take it and they apply it, and it does adjust our target a little bit, maybe, and helps determine whether or not our actual outcome meets the target or not. But I do want to say, I think our programs are doing a good job of collecting this information. Now, all of our students are considered to have English language learners, low level of literacy or cultural barriers. That's why eData is set up to require that one, because Octave has said that all of our students are in this category. But then you're doing a good job of collecting these other items. So thank you for doing that. Okay. Okay. So that table SPR is kind of what the federal departments use to really determine how we're doing against our targets. And this is something that I talked about in the webinar back at the kickoff. So both for those of you who are in person, you saw me saying it. Those of you who joined by webinar, I discussed it. Previously, so for previous program years, for previous reporting periods, Title II was not formally assessed on our outcomes. what I mean by that is, we've always had to report. If I go into that website, I can go back to 2017, 18, and there is a table SPR with outcomes in it. But we were not being, and we were being held to those numbers, but there were no consequences if we didn't meet them because we weren't being, and the word that the feds use is assessed against those targets. In July of this past year, all the state directors got a notice from Octay that, surprise, they were going to be holding us accountable. So they were going to be assessing Title II performance for 2 of the performance indicators in the data that we were submitting, in the reports that we were submitting October 1st. In other words, they are assessing us, they are holding us accountable for performance in the employment in the second quarter after exit and the measurable skill gains. In addition, because they are holding us accountable or they're assessing us in those 2 performance indicators, there is a overall state performance indicator. So what they do is they say, okay, how did Pennsylvania do across all 6 core programs in that employment in the second quarter after exit? How did Title I youth do? How did Title I adult, dislocated worker, OVR, Title II, and Wagner-Pizer? They kind of look at our performance and they have a little formula. Did Pennsylvania meet as a state? And because we, Title II, are being assessed on employment in the second quarter after exit and measurable skill gains, as are all of the other core programs, they can now look at the whole, at the state as a whole for those. So, okay, what does that mean? Well, once the feds apply the statistical adjustment model and they come back and they look, how did Title II do against their employment in the second quarter after exit target? How did they do in the measurable skill gains? If we don't meet them, for the first year, we get to do an action plan of how we are going to meet them moving forward. If we don't meet the same one for a second year, there are sanctions which impact a portion of the funding. It's the governor's set aside, which I believe is a portion of Title I funds that can be used for kind of pilot activities and things like that. So for right now, we are, okay, because this is the first year, so that the most that would happen to us is we would have to come up with an action plan. We would have to participate in technical assistance to see how we could ensure that we meet our target next year. I'm not going to go into the details of how they determine whether or not we've met our target because it's really complicated, and I think it would just confuse things. So our numbers for employment are below our target, but because of the little formula that they use and the statistical adjustment model, it is possible that we will be considered to have met the target for the purposes of assessment or not. We don't know. Okay, I will try to get through these slides a little bit more quickly. I don't think they require nearly as much explanation, and we do have a lot more slides to get through. Our demographics, fairly similar to last year. We had 162 more participants, so we were basically level enrollment. 44% of our students were ABE and 56% were ESL. That actually continues an ongoing trend of decreasing ABE participation and increasing ESL. Last year, it was 46% ABE, 54% ESL. The year before that, it was 50-50. And prior to that, it was actually a little bit more ABE than ESL. So over the years, our percentage of students in ABE has been decreasing. Our percentage in ESL has been increasing. That said, compared to a lot of other states, we do have a much higher percentage of ABE students than a lot of other states do. The demographics of our participants didn't change much. Our student population is 2/3 female, 1/3 male, using the binary sex options. In 24-25, we had 23 individuals, 23 participants who selected either non-binary or prefer not to answer as their sex, and that is what you entered in eData. For federal reporting purposes, in 24-25, the report allowed only female or male. They removed the non-binary and prefer not to answer options that had been added the prior year because of decisions of the current federal administration. So what we have to do is we basically have to say, okay, for the people who haven't identified as male or female, we have to have a formula that we use to kind of randomly assign them for the purposes of federal reporting. So that's kind of where that 2/3, 1/3. But those 23 individuals didn't really make a difference. What we did was there is the option for them to select their preferred pronouns or their gender identity, and for you to enter that in eData. If either of those items indicate that they've chosen either male or female, we will assign them to that category for the federal reporting. If they just select one of the non-gender specific categories, then we just randomly assign them based on the 2/3, 1/3 ratio of the larger population. So the percentage of participants who identified as Black increased from 29% in 23-24 to the 30.2% in 24-25, excuse me. And there were slight decreases in those identifying as Hispanic and white. And the distribution across ages didn't change any. Of note, we had 3,131 participants who qualified as out-of-school youth or opportunity youth. However, there were only 296 participants who showed up as co-enrolled in Title I youth. So I do think that that is maybe an area for better co-enrollment and seeing if we can work with our partners to get those individuals enrolled in Title I youth while also being enrolled in Title II. Some just basic participant status. 47.8% of our students reported being employed at program entry, 41% were unemployed, and 11% were not in the labor force. For schooling, 36% were US and 64% were non-US. I think that's interesting because that indicates that a number of our ABE participants are probably people who are have non-US schooling. And I think I've seen that, maybe non-native speakers of English who have moved from ESL or have started in ABE services. So that's good to see that that's happening in our programs. For those who report US schooling, 75% of them reported that their highest grade completed was somewhere between 9 to 12, but not having graduated. Conversely, for those who are in non-US schooling or whose schooling was non-US, 78% of them were actually had a high school diploma equivalent or higher. So, measurable skill gains. As I said earlier, overall, we were at 41.24%, which was a 4% increase from last year and exceeded our target. ABE levels 1 to 6, 41.73%, again, 4-point increase from last year. And in each of those ABE levels, there was an increase from last year. Sorry. And then for the ESL levels 1 to 6, the MSG was 40.85%. Again, a 4-point increase from last year. We saw increases in ESL levels 1, 4, 5, and 6, and slight decreases in ESL levels 2 and 3. So in federal reporting, there's something called Table MSG. And the nice thing about this is that allows us as a state to show all the measurable skill gains that students showed in a period of participation. So these measurable skill gains in Table 4, we can only report on one measurable skill gain per period of participation for a student. So if you happen to have a student who came into your program, passed one high school equivalence, or let's say you post-tested them, they showed an EFL gain based on that post-test, and then they took a subtest of the high school equivalency test, they passed it, and in doing so, they earned their high school equivalency. Well, that's technically two ways to show EFL gain as an MSG plus the MSG for high school equivalency. But for federal reporting, we would actually only report one measurable skill gain, and that would be by earning the high school equivalency, because the NRS rules say we report the most recent one. This table MSG allows us to say, okay, that allows us to report two of those measurable skill gains. It would allow us to report their EFL gain, and it would allow us to report their high school equivalency credential attainment. So this total MSG 7283 is going to be different than what is on Table 4, because this does include more than one measurable skill gain per pop. So our students last year there were 6,465 EFL gains, either via pre-post test, high school equivalency subtest, or enrolling in post-secondary education or training. Now, for this report, we can't report more than one EFL gain. So say that student who showed a post-test gain and a pre-post and a high school equivalency subtest, that student would only be here once. But if that person then also showed a high school equivalency credential attainment, they are in that 781. Plus, we had a few students who are in integrated education and training activities who showed a measurable skill gain by passing an occupational exam, for a total of 7,283 measurable skill gains, which is great, but that's still less than 50% of our participants. So that's, it's good, but it's great that they've got these measurable skill gains, but we also want to increase that number. Table 4B, which is those people who were pre and post tested. So the only people in Table 4B are the people who had both a pre and post test. Did they get an EFL gain or not? So 55% of the participants had a post test, which was an increase over last year. So thank you. Congratulations. We still have a few programs who are not doing a good job of getting people post-tested, so that number should go up this year. 63% of the people who were post-tested had an EFL gain. That is also an increase from last year. And I talked a lot about that, and I think the February and March webinars this past year. So what I think I saw was people paying attention to that and working on it. So thank you very much. And then there's just some information about the two subgroups, ABE levels and ESL levels, and what their performance was like and whether there were increases or decreases. In the national reporting system, there are tables for various subgroups of participants. And this is the measurable skill gain for those subgroups. So the distance learning participants, who are individuals who had at least 12 hours of distance learning. There were 7,265 participants who had at least 12 hours of distance learning as entered in eData, and they had a 46.66% measurable skill gain. So that was higher than this statewide. Family literacy adults, 527 adults, only had a 38.95% measurable skill gain. What I will say is that is lower than the overall, and that is the first time in at least 10 years that family literacy MSG has been lower than the overall MSG. And that is, in fact, the lowest measurable skill gain in the last 10 years, except for 1920, when, programs shut down due to the pandemic. So that one's a little concerning to me. So family literacy programs, maybe look at that. Section 243 IELCE had a 43.99% MSG. I think that should be a little bit higher than it is, given the resources that are available to the Section 243 IELCE grantees. Corrections education had 608 participants with the 37% measurable skill gains, which I think is pretty good given the challenges. Most of our students are being served in county jails, and I know that, they're not there for as long, as very often they leave suddenly. You don't know that they're leaving. So I think that 37% isn't all that bad, given the special challenges that those participants face during participation. And then our IET participants had a 79% measurable skill gain. They have more opportunities for showing measurable skill gain. They're in the programs longer, but as you can see, there really is good measurable skill gain for those participants. Okay, and I think Chrissy, I think you might have to present on another webinar. Sorry. Effectiveness in serving employers is the 6th performance indicator for the core programs under WIOA. There was a long period of a pilot while the federal offices determined how they were going to define effectiveness in serving employers. They finally landed on retention with the same employer from the second quarter to the fourth quarter after exit. Effectiveness in serving employers is a common measure across all core programs. What that means is we do not report on it as Title II alone. There is one single outcome for Titles 1, 2, 3, and 4 all together. That data analysis was handled by the Pennsylvania State Longitudinal Data System. Thank goodness we have them to do that for us. This was the first official year of reporting under this new this official definition. And as a state, our retention rate was this 70.49%. I would like to point out that when they break them out by program, that while our denominator is smaller, right? So we have fewer people who show up in our data match as being employed in the second quarter after exit. We had 4,823 people who were employed in the second quarter after exit. Our retention rate with the same employer was in fact the highest. I suspect that's not surprising to you. I think you know your students and you know that when they're employed, they tend to keep their jobs. But I did want to present this to you as, evidence that when we have students who, we have the social security number for them and they are employed, and they're in the labor force and they want to be employed, they are staying in their jobs. They're choosing to stay in their jobs and their employers are retaining them. So thank you. Okay, so that was a lot of data. And while we're generally doing well, we do have some much stronger programs and we have some programs that are not doing as well. So this is something that I have been talking to the division team about for a while. And this year, we're working on developing a warning, probation, and termination policy. I was already wanting to do this and talking to the team about it. And then with the implementation of the assessment of our performance, official assessment of our performance, I do believe that this really is the time to do it. Now, as a background, those of you who were here pre-pandemic know that back in 2019-20, the division imposed some grant conditions on the 1920 grants for employment and EFL gains. And the programs that had grant conditions had to implement corrective action plans to address their weaknesses. And we as a division had planned to then move forward with a formal policy around warning and probation for the following year, 2020, 2021. Then the pandemic hit, and we suspended the plan, right? It was just kind of let's get through this, do what you can do, serve who you can serve, get what you can get. We understand the challenges. We're beyond the pandemic now. You've had several years to get your feet back under you. Most of you have, some of you have not. And it really isn't fair to the programs who are successfully meeting contracted enrollment and successfully getting outcomes that they continue to get the same amount of money, and the programs that are not meeting contracted enrollment and having poor performance are also continuing to get the same funding. So we are moving forward with a policy. We plan to formally introduce it in January, February. We will apply it to year-to-date data that we pull in mid-May and do an analysis. And some agencies will likely have warnings with corrective action required for program year 2026-27. Now we do start with warnings. It's similar to what they do at the federal level, where you'll be supported and get some technical assistance in that first year to improve and meet your targets. So for 26-27, there won't be any terminations based on this policy, but this is a way to have accountability for programs that are not able to do what they're expected to do, while recognizing those that are able to do it. Now, you're like, wait a second. So we understand that. You're like, well, okay. We've got this requirement to meet federal targets. We're going to be implementing this warning, probation, and possible termination policy. We need to get, have continuous in program improvement. And we really want to support you in doing this. Like we understand, especially with this year and the challenges, there are a lot of challenges here. But there's a lot of data. We've got a great professional development system. We have a full set of advisors, and we're here to support you. So we are going to be starting with a data awareness campaign to provide support to our programs in understanding and using the data, to help you identify strengths and areas for improvement, to help you evaluate the impact of program improvement and professional development activities, and also to be able to help you draw connections between your program data and the state outcomes and see how you may be impacting and how the work that you're doing aligns with and impacts the overall state performance in the state data. Anne, I'm sorry, I'm only giving you 5 minutes, but Anne was going to provide a little bit more detail about that she has been working with the advisors and with the professional development system to plan for this.
Thank you, Amanda. I think 5 minutes should be okay. I am probably going to talk a little quickly, but I will drop my email in the chat in case anybody has any questions, but we will be following up with more information, I promise. So as Amanda mentioned, the federal government is going to be assessing Pennsylvania's performance based on our reported data. To help strengthen the federal reporting outcome numbers across the state, PDE is launching a data awareness initiative for administrators and DQSs. The kickoff for this program will be online on Friday, December 5th from 10 a.m. to noon. We'll be sending out an email with more information about the initiative soon, so please be on the lookout for that. We're very excited to launch this programming. It's going to help everyone become more confident working with quantitative data and using it to make programmatic decisions. Participants will also have the opportunities to not only work with the PDS, but also with peers from across the state. This initiative is laying the groundwork for next year's PIPD planning. I know it's October and we're talking about PIPD planning, but stick with me. Starting in program year 26-27, all PIPD plans will be required to have at least one program objective that relates to federal reporting outcomes and is backed by data gathered throughout the program year. And again, I will provide more information about this in a follow-up email. Our goal with this initiative is to have programs set them up for success when it comes to increasing outcomes. I'm very much looking forward to the launch of this, and I'm excited to see all the ways in which Pennsylvania adult ed programs will succeed with this initiative. Thanks, Amanda.
Okay, thank you very much. And we do have a great eData tech support team who also have a lot of knowledge about data and using data, and they're working with Anne on developing this data awareness campaign and the related activities. Chrissy, I'm sure you're on here, but I am not going to make you go through your slides in 2 minutes. I think we'll save your slides for another webinar so that you can have enough time to talk about the PA Foundation skills with some detail instead of trying to rush through them. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I did put information in the chat, though, about workforce staff training since we talked about co-enrollment today. If programs do need more support with that, information's in the chat.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like somebody has invited Firefly's AI to record and take notes. As I indicated at the beginning, that is not allowable. So that really should not have happened.
I kicked it out, Amanda.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm sorry, I was looking through to see if there are any questions or comments. So I can stay on for a little bit longer if people have any questions or comments or anything that they wanted to discuss. It's kind of a mixed message there with the data, but I do think, our improvement and measurable skill gain and the fact that we've exceeded the target, I can see that people really worked on that last year. A lot of our programs really focused on that. And I do want to thank you for that because I think it was also helped by the fact that we can now count the high school equivalency subtests as an EFL gain. I think that really helped with a lot of the ABE students who might otherwise not have shown, a gain on pre-post tests, but they did pass that high school equivalency test. So excellent work in that area, and let's keep it up.